It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor. We bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yunji Denise and Ryan Pillay-Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, happy Aloha Friday. Thanks so much for tuning in here to Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. I'm Ryan Pillay-Suji. Yunji Denise has the morning off, and this morning we're going to be catching up with a guest who always has a lot to share. It seems like we always run out of time because there's so much to get to. So we want to bring in this morning Congressman Ed Case joining us, who's actually here in district this morning. Good morning, Congressman. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Aloha. Good to join you.
Well, we always have a lot to cover, so we're going to just jump right in. But first, I just want to get a sense of how things are going in Washington, D.C. The makeup of Congress is different now. Republicans in the majority. How have things been transitioning into this latest session of Congress?
Well, it's a new Congress, and you have to start over in many areas. But on the other hand, this is my fifth full Congress at this point. So I've kind of been to the rodeo on both the majority and the minority side, and I know what I need to do. There are certain things that I need to do early in a Congress. I need to, confirm my committee and subcommittee assignments, my caucus memberships. Clearly, of course, I'm with my third partner in the U.S. House in three Congresses, and so Representative Takuda is now my partner, and it's been a lot of my time and effort devoted to making sure she's underway. She definitely is. And so, there are things that are usual to the process, but there are always new issues that have to be faced in all new situations. So some of it's new and some of it's old, but all of it proceeds in a pretty, from my perspective, a pretty systematic way. What I need to do, when I need to do it, and how I need to do it.
If you can just spend a little bit more time talking about the makeup of this congressional delegation now with Congressman Takuda being added in, how have things been with that transition, bringing someone relatively new into this environment? I know that the last time we spoke that you had said that you were taking some time even before she officially got sworn into office to kind of update her. How have things been in this new working relationship?
It's been a great relationship. I mean, I've known Congresswoman Takuda for some time now. And as you pointed out, I started talking to her directly about being a member of Congress and how to get ready to be a member of Congress and how to optimize the opportunities and decisions that occur to you early on in Congress that are going to influence how you go through that Congress. So I started talking to her last August after she emerged from the primary, and it was likely that she would prevail in the general. And we went through a pretty long and involved process of meeting, usually over Zippy, so it was at least enjoyable from that perspective. And she's done really, really well. She got great committees in terms of agriculture and armed services. She has, I think, found her niches. She's found her interest groups. She has, from all appearances, formed really good and deep friendships. And she has, so I think she's on the right track, and it's great to have her as a partner. And in terms of working with the overall delegation, I mean, that's really been a joy for me over the last almost 5 years now. Senators Schatz and Hirono in the Senate, and I think that formed a pretty good nucleus of the delegation as the second congressional has switched 3 times now, and so that foundation is solid. And Representative Takuda has worked into it. So I think it's going to be a good, solid delegation.
One of the things that's pretty topical right now is just what's happening with international relations with the U.S. I want to start off with the Chinese spy balloons. Of course, there was a lot of attention given there over the past few weeks, and it speaks to just the overall relations with U.S. and China and beyond. We know that this is something that you also have kept an eye on and have also been in contact with. What can you tell us about what's happening specifically with these Chinese, spy balloons and what we're hearing, but more broadly about the U.S.-Chinese relations overall and how it may impact Hawaii?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I just have to say up front is that I'm being regularly briefed and regularly asking questions about spy balloons, whether they're over the continent or in Hawaii or elsewhere. And a fair bit of my information is classified, so I simply can't talk about some of the details. But in the broad parameters of things, clearly China is trying to gain intelligence from us wherever and however it can, whether it be spy balloons or other means. It's not just China. There are other countries doing it, such as Russia. And they are clearly exploiting a number of avenues, and we are clearly countermeasuring those efforts. And these involve Hawaii. It's inevitable given our military presence, our importance in the big picture, strategic, overall strategic picture, as well as the geopolitical challenge of China, that we are going to be subject to some of those efforts, and that's what we're going through. It's not something new. This has been happening for some time. That speaks to where the geopolitical challenge, especially if China, is going, because I believe it's a very, very real geopolitical challenge. So I am not at the camp of this is not a big deal, and we shouldn't worry so much about China. I think this is a challenge of our generation, and I think we have to address it. Hawaii clearly has a role in that, but it's a responsibility of our country and really the broader system of friends and allies around the world who share our values, who share the desire for us all to play within a certain set of rules and to keep us out of war, and it's going to keep us prosperous. And China is not interested in going down that path unless it can control everything. And I don't think that we can allow that to happen. So this is an area that I spend a lot of my time on, not only for our country, but for our Hawaii.
Another area, of course, that related to this international relations is just what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, and the support that the U.S. is providing monetarily, as well as President Biden's recent visit there to Ukraine. If you can speak to the support, your thoughts on U.S.'s financial support and just overall the conflict that exists right now that seemingly has many worried, not only here in Hawaii, but throughout the country, of what could come with this developments in Russia and Ukraine.
Well, there's no sugarcoating it. It is something to be highly concerned about and worried about. A country like Russia that, again, like China, does not share a set of international values and international rules that feels it can simply invade a sovereign, independent country and basically take it over and absorb it into Russia. I mean, that's not just about Russia and Ukraine. That's about anywhere in the world. And so, I said this. Today we are celebrating the 1-year anniversary of Russia's invasion, and everything that I said then still holds. We cannot allow this to happen. We cannot allow this to stand as a world, because not only is it not appropriate for Russia to do that to Ukraine, but those other countries in the world, such as China, are taking note of how the world is responding to this, and if Russia can get away with this, and China can get away with it in the South China Sea or Taiwan or other places, and so there's a lot at stake in Ukraine. And we've got to continue the course that we're on with Russia and the rest of the world, because I think the alternative of not continuing is even far more dangerous than the dangers that we face now by this conflict.
Closer to home, looking at an issue that continues to draw a lot of attention and concern from residents is Red Hill. We haven't really received a whole lot of updates of where we're at right now in the timeline of the defueling process. What can you tell us about what you're hearing in your communications with those who are in charge of the defueling of Red Hill, the timeline, and many just wondering, how do we continue to keep the Navy and military officials accountable for what they have laid out in the plan for the future of Red Hill?
Well, there's a lot of things going on with Red Hill, and I'm in completely regular contact with everybody involved with Red Hill, and certainly provided my own oversight, both individually out of my office and as a member of appropriations, where I've actually had most of the impacts that I've had, both again individually and together with the delegation, in terms of forcing the defueling and closure of Red Hill, and overseeing and funding a timeline that will complete it safely and as efficiently and as quickly as possible. So just in the last few days, for example, I have talked directly with the regional administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. I've talked with the director of our State Department of Health. And I think it was 10 days ago or so, I talked with Ernie Lau. I've talked with the military personally. So this is just a matter of constant oversight. How are you doing? How are you on that time frame? Are you adequately funded? What are the hiccups? Yes, you completely have to be transparent with the public. You have to take care of the public health aspects of Red Hill. My sense is that they are moving along on as quick a time frame as they are able to pursue right now, and they have the resources that they need to do that. There are some things that I need to address with them. For example, one key aspect of the complete defueling time frame is when the fuel is actually brought out of Red Hill proper and down to the dock. It has to be taken somewhere, right? You can't just dump it somewhere, and that takes tankers. And it is a concern to me that the military's time frame may anticipate just one tanker dedicated to that job. So that's a tanker that needs to load up and take it somewhere and come back and load it up. To me, that's not acceptable. I mean, you've got to get multiple tankers. You've got to run this on a concurrent basis so that fuel is completely defueled as soon as possible. So these are constant, timeline efforts that just have to be monitored and overseen and directed with full communication. I think one of the key things that we're all interested in right now and involved in is the amended consent order, which is going to specify on an updated basis many of the requirements of the military. And that is, of course, a matter that the EPA has right now. Very interested in that process and getting that done really within the next 1 or 2 months, so that the details are updated and clarified to the military. But I think Admiral Wade is doing a good job, and I support him. I question him and oversee him where I need to, and I support him wherever I can.
That's an interesting point you brought up on the tanker, because that's something that we've never really heard about, and interesting to hear just your thoughts on that and addressing that issue, because you're right. When you think about that, there seemingly needs to be more than just one. I mean, is this a conversation that you've had already or that you're currently having? And also, what would happen with the fuel? Is there any sort of plan on where, once it's in that tanker, does the fuel, will that remain on island? Will it be transported elsewhere? Have those conversations begun yet?
Well, the military already knows where that fuel is going. It's going to a number of places. It is fairly closely guarded information, but there's no big secret about it. It's going to basically disperse it to a number of locations. So it will maintain a fuel reserve capacity, but it will treat it differently. It will, some of it may be on land, some of it may be kind of mobile. So there's no secret about where it's going. It's just the logistics of how to get it out of Red Hill to where it's going.
And just another follow-up on just the overall what's happening in the dynamics of Red Hill. There has been some call for further transparency, some call for the releases of video footage that the military continues to hang on to regarding the second spill that we saw with some of those forever chemicals that spilled out at the latter part of last year. What are your thoughts overall on that video footage? The military is saying that it's highly classified and that it needs to be reviewed for security reasons. Do you believe that this is footage that should be released to the public? And your overall thoughts about how to improve the transparency and the communication that the military is having with the public?
Well, first of all, to the military's credit, it's far more transparent than it was a year ago, even 6 months ago. I think that there was residual resistance to full transparency within the military for too long, and that caused public distrust. The military was slow to get that lesson, that if it wanted to regain public trust, it needed to be fully transparent, even where it was very uncomfortable to be fully transparent. And so I give them credit for trying for greater transparency, but there's still pockets where you just feel like behind Admiral Wade and others is a bunch of Navy lawyers back in Washington D.C. saying don't do this and don't do that, and that's not acceptable. Now I accept that there may well be security concerns with some of the footage as to Red Hill, and I also accept the explanation given by the Navy for this particular footage that you're talking about from the AFFF secondary spill, which was a very serious spill, that they were completing an investigation and they wanted to complete the investigation before they released the footage. That's fair enough. But they're just about to complete the investigation and release the investigation. And so I would expect, unless they have some compelling national security reason, that footage would then be released.
We always like to bring in questions from the audience, and Casey has a question here. What is the plan to replace the fuel storage capacity that will be lost when Red Hill facility is closed? I'm not sure that you have an answer to that, but obviously the fuel right now is not being allocated to the military. Do you know if there have been plans by the military to make up for some of the fuel that will essentially be lost once this facility is closed and not used, officially all drained out, so to speak?
I'm not quite following the question. The military clearly does not have access at this time to the fuel, and nor should it have access. But it has made contingency plans in the case of an emergency to access fuel needs if it does need them. But again, like I said earlier, the military has full plans to continue the mission of Red Hill. It's just going to continue the basic mission of Red Hill, which is to provide a strategic fuel reserve for in times of emergency. It's just going to do it somewhere else and in other ways.
One final question on Red Hill. What do you think should happen once all of this is complete, once it's defueled and decommissioned and the facility is no longer used in its current state? What do you think the future of that facility looks like at Red Hill? Have there been discussions or anything that you've heard of what the military could use that facility for in the future?
Well, first of all, I'm not positive that it's going to be a military facility in the future. I mean, we have to walk through after a full defuel, we have to walk through an entire analysis of declassification as a fuel depot, and it should be declassified because none of us wants or will accept it continuing as a fuel depot in any way, shape, or form. So there's a lot of options on the table, and it's conceivable that it would not even involve the military. Now, I think it will. But then the question is what? And frankly, I ain't no rocket scientist on that. I don't have any better idea than anybody else. I know it's an active discussion, but from my perspective, my focus is not what we're going to do with Red Hill after it's defueled and closed. I'm completely focused on defueling and closing it, and we can walk through those bases. So frankly, I think that discussion, fine, it's a good discussion. We can all speculate on it right now, but it ain't where my energy is directed.
Another thing that we know that you are working on is the Safe and Quiet Skies Act. We know the commercial helicopters have had some issues, and some tragedy has struck many in the area of Kailua recently. We've heard about that crash, and there's been other instances in the past. But we also know that helicopters are a big part of the tourism industry in Hawaii. If you can explain a little bit more about these efforts and what you're trying to accomplish here with just protecting the skies as well as those around it and that utilize this service in Hawaii.
Well, tour helicopter operations, both in Hawaii and elsewhere, have proven to be dangerous operations. And what's worse, the Federal Aviation Administration, which is responsible for ensuring the safety of those operations, has not done so. And that's not me talking. This is the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, who have to go in there and investigate and clean up deadly crashes like we saw in Dillingham Airfield with the parachutists, and on Kauai and in Kailua. And of course, the one that just happened on Hawaii Island a few months ago, where nobody was killed, but they were hurt, could have easily have been killed. And the NTSB says it doesn't have the ability to regulate for safety, but it has publicly stated, which is very unusual for the NTSB, that the FAA is not accepting its safety regulation recommendations. These are the people who have to clean up crashes and remove bodies. So, I'm going to take them seriously on their word. And so the fact, first of all, is that they are not sufficiently safe to fly in our skies. That's not just about people that are in the aircraft themselves, with the people on the ground. I mean, the only reason that people were not killed on the ground in Kailua was a fluke, frankly. And then to add to that, just incredible community disruption, just a complete, disregard by the tour helicopter companies in particular, and other small aircraft companies for impacts on the ground. I'm just going to give you one brief example. I had a veteran call me who was basically laying a loved one to rest in Punch Bowl. And that service was disrupted by tour helicopters that wanted to fly over Punch Bowl. Now, I don't think tour helicopters should fly over or near Punch Bowl. And so we've got a whole range of issues with these tour helicopters that are unresolved and need to be resolved. And, I don't mind a good partner that's going to be a good neighbor and is going to understand the impact on the ground. They're going to fly certain hours and limit their activities and not fly over residential neighborhoods or, the Arizona Memorial or a national cemetery. But that's not the case of the tour helicopters in Hawaii. And so if they're not going to do it themselves, then we need to do that. Now, to the point of their contribution to the economy. Well, if I went down that road, then I would just say it was okay for visitors to reserve a public beach and do whatever they wanted because there's a return to our economy. It was okay for illegal vacation rentals to exist in residential neighborhoods because it was good for our economy. No, that argument doesn't justify, in my view, outright safety risks as well as complete community disruption. So we need to solve this problem. It's not just a Hawaii problem; it's national too. So I've got a lot of good co-sponsors on my bill this time around because, as I predicted a few years ago, this isn't just about Hawaii. This is going to catch up with the rest of the country.
You mentioned co-sponsors on this. I want to just talk a little bit and address just the overall makeup of Congress. We mentioned at the top that you find yourself with the Democratic Party now in the minority, but we know that in order for anything to get accomplished in Congress, there needs to be that bipartisan effort. If you can speak to the relations that you're having with majority members, as well as just overall the Republican Party, how are you finding things in the working relationship now that you're in the minority? And if you can speak to this bipartisan effort that at times seems to be lacking when we see some of these larger issues and this constant fighting across the aisle, how have you found ways to find some commonality?
Well, first of all, I would say that I've been in both the majority and the minority. On balance, it's better to be in the majority. So this is not the preferred situation to find yourself in the minority. You can be more effective in the majority, but that's a decision for the country. And to go back a little bit, my first 4+ years in Congress back in 2002 to 2007, I was in the minority that entire time, and I got a lot done. And so I take lessons from that period. I think a couple of quick lessons. When you're in the majority, don't burn your bridges with the minority because the minority may be the majority. And so the last 4 years, as the Democrats have been in the majority in the House, I've built bridges where I could with people on the other side of the aisle, worked with them on issues such as the Pacific Islands Caucus, which I still lead, which has been very successful in re-engaging our country with our ohana in the broader Pacific. That was a bipartisan effort. I joined a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. We found a way out of the dilemma that was paralyzing Congress over enacting the largest bill to reinvest in our infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure plan. That was our doing. That was really a bipartisan effort. And so I try to find those areas. I'll give you one other quick example. This week, as I've been home, I spent a day and a half hosting Representative Chris Stewart, who is a Republican from Utah. Now, Chris and I are on different, we have different viewpoints. He's quite a conservative Republican, and I'm not a very conservative Republican. And yet, now we have to work together, and this was part of an interesting program called the Congressional Exchange Program, which is designed to foster relationships between members from both sides of the aisle so that you can work together. And the idea is you spend time in their district to understand their world, to understand what they are trying to deal with, and then they spend time in yours, so you trade back and forth. So last year I went to Utah, and I encountered a very different world, and I learned things that I didn't know, and I developed a rhythm with Chris. He asked me for some help on something. I was in the majority. I could help him. I did. Now he's down here, and I was able to expose him to things that are really brand new to him. For example, I focused on Native Hawaiian issues. That's not something that's his issue, but I'm going to need help with it. So I took him to a Nui School, a Hawaiian language immersion school in Palolo. We sat in on that. I took him to the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, took him to Iolani Palace. And so this is, you've got to do this a lot of different ways, and there's a time for strict partisanship. There's a time for disagreement and debate. That's part of a democracy, but there's also a time to get things done. Chris and I are both now on the on the Appropriations Committee's subcommittee on defense, which handles our entire defense budget, which is a new assignment for me. So we need to have a relationship on that subcommittee to try to get the work done. He shares my concerns about the Indo-Pacific and China. So that's a relationship I can build on, and I can give you other examples of that that are kind of the way out of this polarizing divisiveness.
Yeah, that's just great to hear, because I think oftentimes what we hear in the mainstream media is often just about the divide and some of the conflicts that exist. And it's great to hear that there is, of course, some synergy and some collaboration that's happening there that you've highlighted. Wanted to, we're running out of time and we didn't get to everything, but wanted to quickly ask you about an issue that is being discussed in the legislature right now. And it was a proposal put forth by Governor Green about this so-called green fee that would add a tax or a fee, I should say, for those visitors coming to Hawaii to help offset some of the sustainability costs and to protect some of Hawaii's fragile ecosystem. There's variations of this, how this looks and how this plays out moving through the legislature right now, some more specific to the location and the location fee. There is still language in the bill that would address a larger overarching statewide fee for those who are entering the state. I wanted to get your thoughts. How do you think that this could impact the visitor industry as a whole? And is this something that you support?
Well, first of all, I'm always a little reluctant to wade into state or county government issues. You can easily get yourself in trouble as the federal representative of Hawaii overall. My kuleana is our federal government and how to help Hawaii. So, but on the other hand, as you know, I've never been shy about offering my opinion. And so, I think that's a good, solid initiative, in all honesty. I think that we've had a dilemma for some time now about sustainable tourism. We have had a dilemma for some time now about unbridled growth in tourist arrivals, which exceeded 10 million, before COVID, and are on track to get there again post-COVID. And I think we all realized during COVID that we had probably too many tourists coming in here with too many impacts on our natural resources, on our beaches, on our communities. And so how can we get ourselves to a position where we have a sustainable level of tourists that still generate equal to or more of the same economic benefit to us, and that more directly contribute to the impacts of tourism upon our communities? And so, for example, going back to Representative Stewart, I took him to the top of a Diamond Head up the trail to the monument for sunrise a couple of days ago. Now, that was not only a nice view, but we were accompanied by DLNR Parks Director Kurt Cottrell and his team, and they talked about how there is a fee charged to visitors to go to the top, but not to our local residents. And those visitor fees go back into maintaining that monument and back into the assistance of maintaining our parks overall, which are severely underfunded, if you want another frank opinion from me out of the state government. So I think he's on the right track, Governor Green.
We are almost out of time, but one of the questions that we always ask you is about your future. We're not going to ask you if you're running for governor, because we're asking you that question. That office is not for grabs right now, but want to just talk about your political future, up for re-election. You just if you want to update us on your political future and your plans moving forward.
Well, I know it's rather early since I just got reelected, but Congress doesn't work this way. Usually you have to look to the next election. I fully intend to run for reelection. I think that's my place right now. I think it's critical to have this team, as I already talked about, is a good, solid team. And it's one of the, I think, of course, I'm biased about it, but I think it's one of the best teams Hawaii has seen in a congressional delegation throughout our statehood history. I'm happy with what I'm doing, and I think it's valuable. And so I have filed the necessary papers at the federal level, which is different from actually filing at the state level. That doesn't happen until next year, but those are my intentions.
All right. Well, Congressman Ed Case, thanks so much for joining us this morning and updating us. Always a wide range of topics, but we really appreciate you taking time this morning to update us on what's happening over there in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Okay. Aloha.
Thanks so much. I want to thank Congressman Ed Case for joining us this morning. We covered a lot of different topics, of course, talking about just a wide variety of issues, starting with Red Hill. You heard there from the update that he's continuing to really focus on that defueling effort. Asked him about the future of that facility and really saying that right now the focus is on defueling, holding the military and Navy officials accountable for that timeline that they presented and making sure that all is being done to ensure that it is done safely and done in the most efficient manner. And he says that while the transparency of the military and Navy officials could always improve, he's saying that it's vastly improved from what has happened and what has transpired over the course of what has happened since we found out about what was the incident at Red Hill, saying that they have come a long way and he's happy with the work that Admiral Wade is doing to help to ensure that this is done in a safe process. He also spoke really about the collaboration that's happening with those in the majority in the Republican Party, shared some examples of how he is working alongside other members of Congress to really bridge that gap. And refreshing to hear, oftentimes, as I mentioned, we hear some of the negativity that exists across the aisle, but saying that they have found ways to find commonality and work together on a number of issues. And also pointing out one of the things that he is working on is the Safe and Quiet Skies Act to really regulate tourist helicopters in the area, the disruption that it can cause, and also the damage and danger that it poses to not only those tourists and those who utilize this helicopter service, but also the issues that could exist should we see similar instances of crashes that have happened, of course, highlighted by what happened in Kailua a few years back. So always great to catch up with Congressman Case and hearing his updates, also the international side and the relations that the U.S. is currently involved with, some of the conflicts that we're seeing globally. If you missed any portion of this interview, I encourage you to go back and watch this. Again, this will air on Channel 50 and also be provided on a podcast later today. Next week, we're going to be catching up with Governor Green. Always a lot to talk to with the governor, of course, hearing his update on how he believes the legislature is moving. The governor also changing some things in his budget proposal, adding more money to the state overall budget, getting an update on some of the programs and initiatives that he wanted to accomplish in his first year in office, and some of the appointments that he's seeing some pushback on to lead some of the departments. Of course, most notably what happened with Ikaika Anderson and a new, and some of the new positions that are currently waiting for the administration to be ironed out with some of these appointees. So we'll get an update from the governor on Monday. We hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you right back here on Monday for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. Until then, take care and aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.